Yo, what's up? It's time to make the cool graph for phase 3 of the Perfect Cup Bow, the science experiment. So here you should be in your procedure on phase 3, and on phase 3 it says that you need to use your phase 2 data and create a graph, a scatter plot with the dots connected of the mass of the ice added to the boiling water and the final water temperature. So it says for the x-axis down here on the horizontal x-axis, we need to label this the mass of ice cubes. So you determined the mass of the ice cubes by measuring the ice cubes. So when you did, you should have used one of the scales, and most likely you measured that in grams. Now, if you used a different unit of measure, make sure that you add your units there for your x-axis. Now it says for the y-axis, I need to label that one the final temperature of water. And that's after those ice cubes were added. So final temperature of water. Now before I move on, I got to also add the units there. So if I'm going to do that in Fahrenheit, I need to add those units. Okay, so now that the labels are on the axes, I'm going to look at the range of data that I have for both axes so I know which numbers to use. So let's say that I measured anywhere from 0 to 60 grams of ice. So my x-axis is going to start at 0, and I'm going to have the maximum. My maximum range is going to go up to 60. Well, a really easy way to figure out how to go across these boxes is to find the midway point and say, well, if that line is the midway point, halfway between 0 to 60 would be 30 grams. So I'll go ahead and add 30. Halfway between 30 and 60 would be 45. Halfway between 0 and 30 would be 15. And so I can continue to do that until I have really small gradations. Now I can do the same thing for my final temperature of water. If I have my final temperature of water ranges from something like 67 degrees Fahrenheit to 160 degrees, I can use those numbers to come up with a range. So I want to make sure I incorporate my full range. And so I'll go a little bit below the lowest. So let's say that I'm going to start with 60 degrees and I'm going to go all the way up to 180 degrees. So again, what I'll do is I'll figure out where that midpoint is, and I'll add the midpoint, the line there, and I'll figure out what's halfway between 60 and 180. Well, that would be 120 degrees, and I can continue to split that in half until I have all of my little gradations there. Now, when it comes time to actually plot your data, what you're going to do is, let's say that you added 17 grams of ice. Well, I'd figure out where 17 grams would be on the x-axis, which would be somewhere in there. And then I would go to figure out the final temperature. And this is just an estimate. I have no idea how realistic these numbers are, but let's say if I added 17 grams of ice, let's say it's 115 degrees Fahrenheit. So I would go and I would add my dot right underneath the 120 because it ended up being 117. Okay, so don't add all these little marks, just add the one dot where it needs to be. Okay, and you're going to continue doing that to add all of your dots. If you add more ice, this should have decreased the temperature, so my overall slope should be going down. So once you have the dots on your graph, then you're going to come through and you're going to draw a line to connect your dots to make a scatter plot. Now the reason this becomes so important is because if I say that I want my water to be, let's say 100 degrees Fahrenheit, then I can find where about 100 would be on my y-axis. I can follow that over. I can figure out where it intersects with the line. I can then figure out how much, or I can predict how much ice do I need to add in order to get it to be 100. And for my example here, which is definitely inaccurate, I can figure out that it would be something like 25 or so grams of ice right here would get me to being about 100 degrees Fahrenheit. So creating a graph is important because it allows you to make some predictions. So even if the mass of ice that was added to your boiling water did not actually get you to a temperature that you thought was your most sippable drinking temperature, if you wanted just a little bit more or a little bit less than the temperatures you got after mixing the ice in your water, you can now use your graph as a tool to make some predictions, just as I just showed. So good luck on your graphs. Make sure that you have your axes labeled. Make sure that you've got units in your labels, make sure that you've got a title on your graph, and make sure the dots are connected. Once you have your graph done, move on to phase 4, making your perfect cup bow. See ya.